What's up everybody, D-Man back. Welcome to a brand new video, and today we're going to be doing another Godzilla -2. We're going to call it that for a while until we know what it's actually called. Another Godzilla -2 news roundup. In this video we are going to be continuing our chronological journey through the release of Godzilla -1 and the development of Toho's next Godzilla film, which seems to be a Godzilla -1 sequel given that director Takashi Yamazaki is returning, by talking about events that happened in March of 2024. In this video we're going to be focusing on two interviews conducted by Toho Kingdom all about Godzilla -1, in which Yamazaki peels back the curtain on that film, gives us some insights into the lore, and comments on if Godzilla will fight Anguirus in the sequel. Starting out, I figured this artwork was just too perfect not to put here. It's just such a perfect opportunity. This was a submission by Axel Inc. This was just submitted and it was perfect timing. This is his Godzilla vs. Anguirus art. I love it. I don't think this is a -1 style. This looks actually kind of Millennium to me, which is pretty kick-ass. I love the smoke pouring out of Godzilla's mouth. It looks very cool. And I love the Anguirus redesign. It is very menacing and very epic, and I would love to see Godzilla fight Anguirus in a sequel. This one is just so cool. Great job, Axel. Next up, my man GNA is out here killing it as always. I absolutely adore this piece. Godzilla looks terrifying and devastating and menacing. I love that he's like menacing this crowd right in front of the Ginza Waco building. It's so cool. Such an awesome art piece. Hey, if you want to see what the actual Ginza Waco clock tower looks like in real life, not just in -1, go check out the first episode of Godzilla Ground Zero, a series that I did in which I traveled to a bunch of Godzilla filming locations in Tokyo to show off how they've evolved over 70 years of destruction. This final piece is Tony Stella's second attempt at a Godzilla -1 poster. Of course, Tony Stella is the one responsible for that very iconic Godzilla clock tower poster. This one I actually like a lot more. It's way more simplistic, way more artsy, and also it features the -1 design rather than the Godzilla the Ride design, and I'm kind of bummed that this one didn't get the attention that it deserved. This one did not take off the way the other one did, so I wanted to show it off and get some more hype on it, because it's really great. Okay, getting into those Toho Kingdom interviews. First of all, shout out to my friend Chris Mirjahangir over at Toho Kingdom. Great friend. He has been a friend of the channel for a really long time. He's a great guy. He's helped me out a ton over the years, and he gets to do interviews like this, and he always asks incredibly hard-hitting questions that fans want to know that cut really deep. It's actually something Yamazaki even gives him credit for during this interview. It's really exciting when he gets to do interviews because he gets right to the bone of the meat and finds out exactly what we're wanting to hear, and there's a lot of juicy info in these interviews. They are both linked down below if you want to go read them in full, but for now, I'll run through them. So in the first interview, Takashi Yamazaki reveals that it was a dream of his to premiere a film in the United States, and he says that that dream has now come true. But he does admit that Godzilla -1 was a movie made with only a Japanese audience in mind, so he was actually really fearful that it wouldn't work for US audiences before it released, but he was very happy viewers were so receptive to it. Yamazaki said that where the world is heading is a very scary place, and so Godzilla -1 was made to reflect anti-war, anti-nuke, and specifically anti-nuclear war themes, as they are in some ways more relevant now than they have been since at least the 80s. Much like myself, Yamazaki says he is disappointed that nothing has changed with the nuclear situation since around 1954, and he feels that Godzilla is truly a manifestation of our continued lack of addressing the nuclear problem around us, and as long as that persists, so will Godzilla. Yamazaki's Godzilla is the embodiment of war and nuclear weapons as a living creature. Godzilla is all the hatred that war and nukes breed combined into one living entity, and that's what makes him so powerful in that movie. Not literally, it's not literally like in GMK, it's a metaphor, much like in the original film. This I found incredibly interesting, and I would have never guessed. Yamazaki reveals that Toho is not the one that made Godzilla -1 a solo film. It was Yamazaki's idea. Yamazaki was passionate about this specific story and wanted to make it this way because that's the idea he had and that's what he was passionate about. It wasn't some Toho mandate to keep Godzilla in solo films from here on out, which is what's been widely misreported online, and I'm glad that that's been laid to bed. bad. Toho is open to versus movies. That's just not what they were doing here because that's not what the filmmaker wanted. Really quickly, an important thing I've learned over the years, especially talking to Shinji Nishikawa, who has worked in the Godzilla franchise since 1989, is that it's very different in Japan than it is in the United States film industry. The director is absolutely the king. The producers are not as influential as they are here in the United States, where they can come in last second and make major rewrites to the film and major revisions that completely alter the course of what the movie was supposed to be. Sounds like what the director wants goes, and that's why I'm glad to hear Yamazaki got final say on this. Yamazaki also reveals he's been in talks with Toho before Shin Godzilla was being made about making a solo Godzilla film. They actually encouraged him to make the film sooner, but he convinced them to wait until the technology caught up with his vision. Of course, him being the VFX director as well, he would know when that would happen. His Godzilla film was always going to be a solo movie and was always going to be a post-war setting. And the idea was always that everybody had to scrap together with the leftovers of the war to try and battle Godzilla. Other interviews, Yamazaki also reveals that Shin Godzilla made his decision to go post-war incredibly easy as a way to avoid direct comparisons to that movie. I love this quote. Yamazaki wants to introduce a new diva superstar kaiju that already exists for Godzilla to take on in the sequel. As of February 2024, he had not picked who that diva superstar kaiju would be, but I like that first of all, that's an indication it will be a Toho returning classic. Next, I like the word diva because the only kaiju I would actually describe as a diva, Anguirus is a pretty solid contender for a diva kaiju, but I think the one that holds that title the best is Rodan, and I think that's very fun. I don't think that's an indication of where he's headed. I think he's just saying he wants to use one of the Toho fan faves, one of his faves in this next movie, but I just like the word diva superstar kaiju. It was cracking me up. He then says that he wants to wait to make a sequel to Godzilla -1 with another monster until the CGI technology he has access to catches up to the idea he has in his mind. Until he can bring the story in his mind to life in a way that he feels satisfying, he wants to wait to allow the technology to catch up to him. His main challenge for the sequel is trying to keep the audience focused on the human story and the drama while the monsters are battling. To keep the story grounded would be his biggest struggle. This is an ongoing discussion that we've been having forever in the Godzilla fan base, and it's a struggle that every single Godzilla filmmaker has bumped into in one way or another. And how they handle that is very telling about what stories they want to tell. He wants to find a solid balance between the human story and the monster battles so that we can be invested in the drama while still getting our fan fulfillment of seeing Godzilla fight another monster. He says the script would take lots of time and work to get right, and he wouldn't move forward with a sequel unless he can truly nail down the script and is happy with his vision. And the fact that he is moving forward with a new Toho Godzilla movie gives me an indication that he has done so and gives me an indication that we are in good hands. This leads us into the second interview conducted, I believe, in March of 2024, and this one's got a lot more info on the lore of the movie. First of all, Yamazaki reveals that there was never an idea to show the Oto Island village. The backstory there is that it's a very urban village, and the legends of Godzilla have been grounded in reality and spread through word of mouth. The legend specifically is that the Oto Islanders used to sacrifice people to Godzilla, much like the lore in the 1954 film. It's the exact same premise. This is something that I love to hear. It's very interesting, and it takes some of the burden off of Shikishima's shoulders, not that he will ever know this, but Yamazaki confirms that because Godzilla withstood a nuclear blast, the 20mm gun on Shikishima's plane wouldn't have had much effect on Godzilla. Even if it would have hurt Godzilla, it would have only resulted in an even worse calamity because Shikishima would have died in the moment, and then he wouldn't have been there to save the day at the end of the movie. Yamazaki wanted to make it clear that Godzilla can grow from one form into the next. That's what inspired the decision to include the pre-evolved Godzilla. The Oto Island Godzilla was made to look different from the Godzillasaurus in 1991 as a way to make it clear that this is a very different creature. This isn't just some sort of offspin of a traditional dinosaur, but Godzilla is already his own monstrous thing before the radiation is introduced. Of course, Yamazaki also reveals that the Oto Island Godzilla already contained a regeneration factor before he was hit with a nuclear bomb. This makes Godzilla something more mythical than your traditional dinosaur and something more magical than your Godzillasaurus. Yamazaki says he will not answer any questions about the mark on Noriko's neck, as that's something for us to interpret and decide, and for us to unpack in a potential sequel. Godzilla's roar, the one used undersea to attract him at the end of the movie, was recovered from the reporters on the rooftop in Ginza. This is given more attention in the novelization. I think it's very telling that Godzilla's response to hearing that roar is to immediately go into defense mode and try and attack that thing to kill it, and I think that means Godzilla probably didn't get along with other members of his species, and probably won't be getting along with any other kaiju in any sequel anytime soon. Yamazaki does confirm that the novelization for Godzilla -1 is canon. He then apologizes that it isn't translated for English for the West yet, and says he hopes someday that can happen. The reason the -1 novelization is canon on a much higher degree than all of the MonsterVerse novelizations, for instance, is because it was written by the director and a writer of the movie himself, director Takashi Yamazaki, giving it a special importance. Yamazaki teases that Godzilla might not be the last of his kind, and that this was left as an unexplained mystery in the film for a reason. He then explains that one reason he won't confirm too much about the speculation in Nodoko's neck, Godzilla being the last of his kind, or even Godzilla's origins, is because he wants us to be able to speculate. He wants to keep speculation, discussion, and fan theories alive and healthy on the film, but more importantly, he doesn't want to reveal too much and write himself into a corner, where when he goes to make a sequel, it's a lot harder to come up with ideas because he's revealed too much already, locking him into ideas that he doesn't love and putting him in a corner. I think that's really smart. I love this interpretation. Yamazaki talks about why Godzilla moves so much slower after he's nuked. He says that Godzilla moves so much slower after his evolution because of the size change. First of all, Godzilla's a lot bigger now, but also because in order to survive the nuke, Godzilla had to sort of elevate himself into something of a half creature, half god. I really like that. It ties into Shin Godzilla very well, who was very similar, truly a god incarnate. This means that Godzilla's movements are a lot slower and more intentional. They're no longer animalistic, they're divine. I think that's great. Yamazaki makes it clear that if he got a sequel to Godzilla -1 with no limitations, he would want it to be all the same characters back to continue the same story of the first film. He then stresses that this idea might not happen if Toho doesn't want it to, because of course they're going to be the ones that greenlight the next story. He gets to pitch the story, they get to pick it, and if they pick it, seems like he has full reign on whatever they've picked. The main theme for the film is the idea that people's will to live, or force of wanting to live, can overpower destruction, war, and the looming nuclear threat on at least a symbolic level. Finally, this is the thing you've been waiting for. Yamazaki directly acknowledges the potential for Anguirus to appear in a sequel. I love it! He directly acknowledges how surprised he is to see so many Anguirus fans and to see such a vocal outcry for Anguirus to appear in a sequel. He says he finds it very interesting that people want Anguirus back so bad, considering he thought that monster wasn't very popular. He wonders if it's because his film is so closely tied to the original, and therefore a sequel would be so closely tied to Godzilla Raids Again. He thinks that's the reason fans are so much more vocal about Anguirus now more than ever, but he does hear us and he does acknowledge us. He will then not comment on if that's the direction he's gonna head in the sequel, but he does chuckle at how much of a fan favorite Anguirus has become. This response actually I find very telling. The fact that he keeps laughing through the answers, we don't get to hear it, it's all written down, but it makes me think he's not considering it very heavily. It makes me think he's got his own monster diva superstar he would like to introduce in a sequel, and that Anguirus doesn't quite match up to that. Based on the way he answers in this interview, I don't think he's considering Anguirus, mostly because I don't think he considers Anguirus the same way that we do. The fact that he acknowledged it does mean it's on his mind, and he's been considering it since at least March, before he picked the final version of the story, so there is a huge potential that Anguirus could appear, especially given that he as well acknowledges how closely related his film is to Godzilla 54 and Godzilla Raids Again. So never say never, and I do think the legacy aspect of Anguirus being the first monster Godzilla ever fought is a huge reason Anguirus could appear in a sequel. But I do kind of get the impression Yamazaki has a different idea based on the way he answers this question. So while I don't think this squashes the theory of Anguirus appearing in a sequel, I don't think it's as good of a sign as we would have hoped for. There's always a chance though. Finally, Yamazaki confirms Toho is putting a lot of thought into the home release of Godzilla -1, and that the US release of the film would be coming under their leadership. I just bring that up because there was a whole conspiracy that Godzilla -1 was being censored in the West for some reason, even though it had just been in theaters. So I like to just say, no it wasn't, no it never was, and shut up. Alright, that'll do it for this one, guys. What do you think about all this? What is your biggest takeaway or revelation? For me, it was the idea that Godzilla would have always survived, even if Shikishima had shot him. That's kind of the impression I get in the movie, but I'm glad to hear that confirmed. And I'm very curious about this Anguirus situation. I like that he acknowledges him, but it does make me a little nervous that he keeps laughing about the idea of Anguirus being a fan favorite. So maybe he's laughing because he's like, oh good, I'm in the clear, people are gonna like this. Or maybe he's laughing because he's like, that's crazy, I never would have thought that. He's not one of mine. I don't know. I'm very interested to see moving forward. As always, I want to give a huge thank you to my patrons over on Patreon for all the support. By supporting the Patreon, that is the most direct way to support the channel, and you can do so using the link in the description below. Thank you guys all for watching. I hope you enjoyed. I will see you all next time for the next one. D-Man, out.